Welcome.
You are watching Line Screw 1. Well, hello tubers. I hope you're doing well wherever you are in this crazy YouTube universe. Today we're going to talk about something different because that's all I like to do is talk about a lot of different things. You never really know what you're going to get next on my channel because I got a lot of different interests and hobbies and things that I spend my time doing. So today I'm going to give you Radio Havana Cuba, the English broadcast. I'm a bit of a radio buff. I've loved radio all my life. I remember building crystal radio sets, and I loved listening to shortwave radio because back in the day, long before the internets were around, that was how you got your information over large distances to your home cheaply. You didn't even buy a newspaper. You just pulled out the shortwave radio, tuned around at night, and listened to the world around you. And it was quite fascinating. And one of the stations that's been around for a very long time is Radio Havana Cuba. I've listened to it on and off for years, and they actually broadcast in 9 different languages, English being one of them. And over the years, their propaganda machine has somewhat mellowed over the years, I would say. And I've been to Cuba many times, especially for Christmas. If you're interested in one of my trips, I'll put a link in the description. It's called The Capitalist in Cuba. You can catch that if you're up to it. So as I said, the propaganda machine is still alive, and it's quite interesting to get a glimpse into how Radio Havana Cuba is still broadcasting their propaganda. Most Cubans know which way's up. Millions of people travel to Cuba every year, and the flow of information is pretty much impossible to be restricted by the government anymore. But yet, Radio Havana Cuba continues to broadcast. So I'm going to share with you the hour-long broadcast from yesterday from Havana. Now, listening just to a radio broadcast is a bit boring, so I've actually put some beautiful images of Cuba up for you to watch as you listen to the propaganda machine. So enjoy, and welcome to Cuba.
A continuación, Radio Havana Cuba comienza su programación en idioma inglés por onda corta, frecuencia modulada e Internet.
Hey everybody, welcome to Radio Havana Cuba's English language broadcast. We've got news from Cuba and around the world, and some other great features for you too. We've got Cuba Today with Cristina Escobar, heard every Tuesday and Thursday here on Radio Havana Cuba. We'll bring you Rosa Meneses Albizu Campos with a report from our sister Caribbean island of Puerto Rico. Abel Vasquez has his exclusive sports report, and Mike Hudson has Connecting the Dots, heard every week here on Radio Havana Cuba. Lots of stuff, all stuffed into the next 60 minutes, so stay with us right here on Radio Havana Cuba. Let's go over now to our national news desk with Dianelis Gonzalez.
Thank you, Ed. We have to change concepts, change mentalities to unleash the productive forces definitively, and the order in tasks favor these, assured President Miguel Díaz-Canel Bermúdez in Santi Spiritus on Monday. The president recalled the complexity of the country's moment, marked by the hostile policies the Trump administration applied against the island until the last day, and the consequences deriving from the COVID-19 pandemic. This is a visit to exchange with you, to learn also about what is being done in the territories, to gather what are the things that we still from the central government have to help unblock. This is also to encourage, to explain, to argue, and to exhort you to fight for the homeland, for the revolution, and our socialism, said President Miguel Díaz-Canel Bermúdez. In the Central Province, the president encouraged its people to work tirelessly to advance in all areas, especially to contain the pandemic's resurgence and in the economy. In the conclusions of the working visit, the president specified that Santi Espíritu has experience and enthusiasm to advance much more. On Monday, Miguel Díaz-Canel, accompanied by high-ranking officials of the Cuban Communist Party and the government, also visited Villa Clara province. The National Director of Epidemiology, Dr. Francisco Duran, urged Cubans to be responsible and to abide by the protocols devised to avoid infection with the SARS-CoV-2 virus that caused COVID-19 disease. After performing more than 15,000 PCR tests on Monday, the National Network of Molecular Laboratories diagnosed 786 new cases of the disease, a dramatic and alarming increase in the figure of new infections and the highest for a day since the beginning of the pandemic. With this figure, Cuba reports a cumulative total of 22,614 diagnosed people with the disease and 200 fatalities. Over the last 24 hours, 9,954 people remained hospitalized. Of them, 4,665 positive patients, the highest number ever. Havana province reported the highest number of new cases with 344, followed by Santiago de Cuba with 121, Guantanamo with 82, and Matanzas with 28. U.S. Congressman James P. McGovern, chairman of the House Rules Committee and a senior member of the House Agriculture Committee, sent a letter to President Joe Biden asking him to restore and repair relations between the United States and Cuba. I'm so looking forward to working with you on repairing relations between the United States and Cuba. I urge you to act early, quickly, and comprehensively to repair the great harm that has been done to U.S.-Cuban relations, to the Cuban and American people, the letter reads. The lawmaker said he believed the United States' biggest mistake in its policy toward Cuba would be to adopt an incremental approach when undoing the last 4 years' damage. Also, he asked President Biden to restore a fully functioning U.S. embassy and consular services in Cuba to be headed by an experienced, highly skilled ambassador and to open up travel, interchanges, and commerce between the American and Cuban people. Congressman McGovern also requested the immediate end of any sanction against food, medicine, and other humanitarian assistance to Cuba. Other voices in the United States call on the new president to prioritize the Cuba issue, including such foreign policy organizations as the Washington Office on Latin America and the Center for Democracy in the Americas. Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez reiterated on Tuesday the island's invariable and unequivocal position of support for the One China principle. On Twitter, the minister also condemned the interference in that brotherly country's internal affairs. The One China principle establishes that the entire Asian country, including Taiwan's island, is a legitimate government with its capital in Beijing. Respect for this government policy is an essential requirement for maintaining diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China. On repeated occasions, Beijing has criticized the United States for its interactions with Taiwan and the sale of arms to the island's separatist government. Washington's actions take place despite its endorsements of the One China principle in joint communiques signed with China in 1972, 1978, and 1982. The international community approved with 170 votes a resolution in 1971 that considers the People's Republic of China the only legitimate representative to the United Nations and recognizes the Southern Territory as a part of this nation. To move toward the complete reunification of the national territory, Beijing also defends one country's policy, two systems, applied in the administrative regions of Hong Kong and Macau. The permanent representative of Cuba to the United Nations, Pedro Luis Pedroso, called for an inclusive, participatory, and transparent debate within the process of reforming the Security Council of that international body. Cuba believes that this process should address all substantive issues related to the category of members, the veto power question, regional representation, the size of an enlarged Security Council and its working methods, and the relationship between the Council and the General Assembly, Pedroso said. The Cuban diplomat expressed his country's support for expanding the Security Council, both in the category of permanent and non-permanent members, and to rectify the underrepresentation of developing nations. According to the Foreign Minister's website, Ambassador Pedroso stressed that the member states should lead the reform process and all positions should be taken into account in equal conditions. He said that such expansion should include increasing new permanent members, at least to countries from Africa to developing nations from Asia, and an equal number from Latin America and the Caribbean. And this is all for today. These are some of the most important news you're following here in Radio Havana Cuba. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dianelis Gonzalez with our national news. Now let's check out what's happening internationally around the world with Natalie Howard.
The U.S. House of Representatives has presented its article of impeachment against Donald Trump to the Senate, a step that formally sets in motion the Senate trial against the former U.S. president. Walking from one side of the U.S. Capitol to the other, 9 House managers appointed by Speaker Nancy Pelosi hand-delivered the impeachment document to the Senate on Monday evening. The article charged Trump with, quote, incitement of insurrection in relation to the deadly storming on January 6th of the U.S. Capitol building in Washington, D.C. by a mob of his supporters. The House impeached Trump on January the 13th on the same charge, making him the first president in U.S. history to be impeached twice. Representative Jamie Raskin, a constitutional scholar and one of the House managers who will be acting as prosecutors in the Senate trial against Trump, read the article of impeachment out loud to the Senate on Monday. Quote, President Trump repeatedly issued false statements asserting that the presidential election results were the product of widespread fraud and should not be accepted by the American people or certified by state or federal officials, Raskin said. The formal step kickstarts the trial phase of the impeachment process, in which all 100 senators will sit as jurors to hear evidence and legal arguments from the House managers and Trump's defense team. To be convicted, the Senate must secure 2/3 majority on the impeachment charge. If that happens, a subsequent vote could bar Trump from running for public office again in the future. Venezuela's Juan Guaido is a so-called, quote, privileged interlocutor, but no longer considered interim president, European Union states said in a statement on Monday, sticking by their decision to downgrade his status. The EU's 27 states had said on January the 6th they could no longer legally recognize Guaido after he lost his position as head of parliament following legislative elections in Venezuela in December, despite the EU not recognizing that vote. Following the re-election of President Nicolás Maduro in 2018, Guaido, as head of the parliament, became interim president. Guaido is still seen by the United States and Britain as Venezuela's quote-unquote president. The status of interim president gives Guaido the legal right to steal funds confiscated from Maduro by Western governments, as well as affording him access to top officials and supporting his illegal agenda domestically and internationally. The United States has reported its first known case of the COVID-19 variant first detected in Brazil. The Minnesota Department of Health confirmed the case on Monday, the same day President Joe Biden extended coronavirus restrictions, barring most non-U.S. citizens who recently traveled to Brazil, South Africa, and several European countries from entering the United States. The variant of the novel coronavirus, known as P1, was detected in a specimen from a Minnesota resident with recent travel history to Brazil, the state's health department said in a statement. The agency said it marks the first documented instance of the P1 variant in the United States. While the so-called Brazil variant is thought to be more transmissible than the initial strain of the virus that causes COVID-19, it's not known whether the illness it causes is more severe. The US has registered more than 25 million infections, around 1/4 of global cases, as well as more than 420,000 deaths since the pandemic began, according to Johns Hopkins University data. The new head of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, warned on the weekend that coronavirus-related deaths in the U.S. could surpass 500,000 by next month. The CDC and U.S. State Department also announced that, as of Tuesday, all travelers entering the U.S., including U.S. citizens, will need to show a negative COVID-19 test before boarding their flights. South Africa is reportedly paying nearly 2.5 times more for the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine than EU countries. The news has prompted stronger calls to halt vaccine nationalism and price gouging. EU nations are reportedly paying less because they funded research and development for the vaccine. In other news, the World Health Organization has struck a deal with Pfizer and BioNTech for up to 40 million vaccine doses for COVAX, the international effort to distribute the vaccine to poorer nations. COVAX is set to start distribution next month, with a plan to deliver around 1.8 billion doses to 92 countries this year, which would cover just over 1/4 of their populations. Police made arrests in Australia on Tuesday as thousands of people defied public health concerns and protested against the mistreatment of Indigenous people on the day marking the 1788 arrival of the British First Fleet. For many Indigenous Australians who trace their lineage on the continent back tens of thousands of years, the Australia Day holiday is known as Invasion Day, symbolising the destruction of their cultures by European settlers. In Sydney, Indigenous groups called for protests to demand the National Day be changed, although state health officials have refused to make an exemption to social distancing rules to allow for crowds of more than 500 people. Television footage showed protesters gathering early on Tuesday in small groups to comply with the limits. Police have warned protesters could face fines and imprisonment for breaching public health orders designed to limit the spread of the novel coronavirus. Images published by news organisations as well as on social media showed police dragging several protesters away from the march in Sydney. In Melbourne, rally organisers said protesters would be sorted into groups of 100 people with 10 metres or 30 feet between each to comply with social distancing rules. Images posted on social media, however, showed a large group of masked protesters gathered at one of the major intersections of the city. They held up their fists in the air and chanted, "One voice." The coronavirus pandemic is continuing to take a severe toll on children and young people. A new report finds 1 in 6 households in the US with children have not been getting enough to eat. School closures have also meant many young people are not getting essential mental and emotional support from teachers and therapists. In Nevada, a surge in student suicides has led officials in Las Vegas to move towards reopening schools, even with the risk of staff and students becoming infected with COVID-19. In the U.S. state of Texas, Dallas County has reversed a plan to prioritize vaccinating people in its hardest-hit areas, largely communities of color, after state authorities threatened to cut their supply, saying it did not meet official distribution guidelines. With hospitals overrun and supplies of oxygen running out, Brazilian epidemiologist Yesem Orellana said COVID-19 patients' hospital beds in Manaus, the capital of the country's Amazonas region, turned into, quote, asphyxiation chambers. Manaus is lost, said Orellana, who described the city as an open-air laboratory, quote, where all types of negligence and inhumanity are possible, and in which people are dying at home with no medical support. He warned that the collapse of the local healthcare system, propelled in part by the discovery of a potentially more contagious variant of COVID-19 in the region, could happen in other parts of Brazil too. It is not only possible that it will happen, it is already happening, Orellana, who works at the Fiocruz Amazonia, a public health research center in Manaus, told reporters. Quote, there are people in the state of Pará who have died from lack of oxygen. When you start getting low on oxygen supplies, you start having problems with increased demand for hospital beds, and that could have a domino effect. Nearly 200 National Guard members have tested positive for the coronavirus after they were deployed to Washington, D.C. for Joe Biden's inauguration, following the deadly failed insurrection at the U.S. Capitol on January the 6th. Guard members say they did not receive COVID-19 tests on their arrival in Washington and were left, quote, packed like sardines in cramped spaces in and around the Capitol, including in an unheated parking garage. The National Guard says troops will remain in Washington, D.C. to protect the Capitol through Donald Trump's impeachment trial.
Thanks, Natalie. Natalie Howard with our international news, and before that, on our national news desk, Dianelis Gonzalez. And you tune to Radio Havana Cuba. Today is Republic Day in India. The date honors the Constitution of India, which came into force on January the 26th, 1950, 70 years ago today, replacing the Government of India Act of 1935. Today is a national holiday in India. And on this date in 1944, U.S. black political activist and scholar Angela Davis was born in Birmingham, Alabama. Angela was a leading radical in the black liberation struggle and was jailed in the 1970s, leading to a huge international campaign for the freedom of Angela. Angela Davis is still active today, working on prisoners' rights, writing books, and working to abolish the prison industrial complex. Angela Davis turns 77 years old today, and we wish Angela a very happy birthday. And you've tuned to Radio Havana Cuba. Thanks for joining us on your radio. Our commentary and viewpoint is up next with Susana Nieves.
News recently broke off the death of Chilean Judge Juan Guzmán Tapia, the first lawyer in that country to lead investigations and prosecute dictator Augusto Pinochet, although some judicial mechanisms failed to enforce the regulations in this case. In January 1998, the judge took over the case known as the Caravan of Death, a heinous repressive action organized under Pinochet's direct orders shortly after the coup d'etat against President Salvador Allende in September 1973. It was a nationwide tour by a group of military officers under the command of General Sergio Arellano Stark, with the aim of assassinating dozens of people in several cities who had been arrested after the coup and were awaiting illegal court-martial. Guzmán evaded the amnesty law enacted by the coup regime to cover perpetrators of serious human rights violations by demonstrating that the bodies of those executed had never been found. Therefore, they fall within the category of disappeared, and according to international law, forced disappearance is a crime that continues to be committed until the victim is found. With such a track record, the Spanish magistrate Baltasar Garzón obtained in October 1988 an international arrest warrant for Augusto Pinochet, enforced when the dictator was visiting the United Kingdom, and British authorities, however, decided to return him to his country. Still, Guzmán did not cease in his efforts to pursue justice for the victims of these crimes, and finally the general was withdrawn the title of lifetime senator. Thus, in 2001, he managed to indict him for the crimes of genocide, kidnapping, illicit association, and illegal burial, but Pinochet was held on house arrest while awaited the corresponding trial. His attorneys argued that his alleged poor health made him unfit to stand trial, and Pinochet died in 2006 without having been convicted and held accountable for the crimes committed. Judge Guzmán retired in 2005, thus putting an end to a 35-year career characterized by audacity and resilience in the face of the enormous pressures he had to endure to demonstrate that in a normal world, there's nothing before justice. An honorable judge whose legacy lingers for those who have the power to condemn wrongs and atrocities, those willing to invoke true justice.
Thanks, Susana Nieves, with our commentary viewpoint here on Radio Havana Cuba. Well, up next, let's listen to a program that we bring you every Tuesday and Thursday here on Radio Havana Cuba. It's called Cuba Today, and it's presented by Cristina Escobar. Cristina?
Hi, this is Cuba Today. I am Cristina Escobar, and you're listening to Radio Havana Cuba. Women's rights have always been a priority in this country. When you compare Cuba to other countries of the region, the situation here is quite different. All girls go to school, more than half of university students are women, sexual education and the use of contraception is taught and provided as an affordable choice, and abortion is a right in this country where religion doesn't dictate the public agenda. But Cuba still has a male chauvinist society, and while the patriarchy is challenged all the time, it remains solid. What's been done to tackle this? How are the guarantees of women's rights evolving in this country? I'm talking to you from my home in Havana, where you might hear some background noise of my baby girl demanding attention. Sorry about that. In this show, I try to bring you a deeper perspective on the Cuban reality. Today is Tuesday, January 26. We have less than 10 minutes, so please, bear with me. For 60 years, this country has put women at the center of many policies. That's why, as we speak, I enjoy 1 year's paid maternity leave. There is an affordable daycare provided for working parents, and girls not only have the right to free education at all levels, but they actually do better than boys. The majority of teachers, lawyers, and journalists in Cuba are women, but still, culturally, it is a country where women are discriminated against, viewed with double standards, and where we have a harder path to economic independence. Vilma Espín is probably known as the biggest and most successful fighter for women's rights in this country. A middle-class college graduate from Santiago de Cuba with a promising career ahead, she chose, in the 50s, to fight in the Sierra Maestra, where the resistance against the dictator Fulgencio Batista was undertaking a war that finally led to the Cuban Revolution. Vilma was brave enough to abandon the comfort of her home and take part in a guerrilla struggle of mostly men. And there she found the love of her life, Raúl Castro, who, while still very young, fought beside his brother Fidel Castro and was one of the most prominent figures of that war, and over the years became a general, and the second secretary of the Communist Party, and then the first secretary of the Communist Party. Vilma devoted her life to the fight for women's rights in a world of men, and took the humanitarian conviction of the new revolution to make it a women's revolution, as Fidel said back then. Although she passed away years ago, her drive took us to where we are now. 2020, as we all know, has been a complicated year for everyone. But women have been harder hit, as children have had to stay at home, and despite efforts to the contrary, women continue to be the main caregivers in Cuba. But it has also been an interesting year for the women's agenda in this country. The Council of Ministers approved the National Program for the Advancement of Women, which is basically an update of the Beijing Platform for Action, approved in the 4th World Conference on Women convened by the UN in September 1995 in China. The empowerment and protection of women from any form of discrimination were the main goals of this landmark gathering. For years, it looked like Cuba was stagnated in this regard, kind of taking for granted the fight for gender equality. However, the situation, of course, was far better here than in any other country in the region. But this was not enough. And finally, last year, this program was passed and provides an updated perspective on women's rights. According to the head of the Women's Federation, the idea is to articulate a program of protection against domestic violence and workplace harassment or discrimination among all actors of society, including government institutions, public prosecutors, and society as a whole. The program is set in a context where Cuba recently passed a new constitution and will hold a referendum to decide on a new family code. In a TV public appearance, the head of the Federation of Women explained that the program aims to promote education with a gender approach in families and communities and to train public officials in order to encourage awareness in this regard. The program will also address violence against women within the household, a problem that happens less in this country, but does have presence in many domestic environments. Another of the issues this program will tackle is employment, because there are over 1 million women at home not working in formal jobs in Cuba, and one of the reasons is that women continue to be the main caregivers for children and the elderly in a fast-aging population. This program is great news for Cuba, providing an update in terms of human rights and the acknowledgement of pressing issues that should be addressed quickly, as no society can advance without its women fully integrated and protected. The program should be the first step in a wider strategy that includes campaigns such as zero tolerance and a whole strategy to prevent gender and domestic violence and provide assistance to victims. However, patriarchy, which is a hierarchical, structured society in which men hold more power and is rooted in capitalism, is a reality in this Latin American country where machismo is seen every day. So, for example, how is this expressed in our context? Girls are expected to study, to be good, to get to university, to work. But in the end, motherhood, also expected from a woman, is far more of a burden for women, and the elderly in the vast majority of families are also their problem. At the same time, street harassment is a daily experience, unfortunately, for women in Cuba. So a program, although necessary and potentially beneficial in tackling this issue, is not enough to eliminate this patriarchal society. The challenges were well listed by Ania Terrero and Dixie Edith, two bright journalists, mother and daughter, who write a column on this topic for the most visited Cuban news website, Cuba Debate. They say that over 20% of the Cuban population is aged over 60. This impacts women directly. The statistics show that only 5% of people questioned about this issue would choose a man as a carer. So it's up to us, women, to care for older people in the family and the associated demands of this. In terms of employment, the situation is also not favorable to women. Almost 77% of men in Cuba work. At least they report formal employment. And only 49% of women report to be working. And in rural areas, this gap is even bigger. In the private sector, the difference is abysmal, which confirms the trend that although women do have many opportunities, there are more men in better paid jobs than women. In the private sector, another figure shows the disparity, as the majority of women in the sector are contracted workers, not owners or business founders. Employment is crucial to analyze this issue because economic independence is a must in order to give women a true chance for equality. It is not a done job, obviously, but this new program shows the willingness of the Cuban government to see this issue as an evolving problem that requires new approaches. We'll come back to this complex issue soon. So this is Cuba Today. The purpose here is to put in context what's going on in Cuba so you can make sense of what the media is talking about regarding this always misunderstood and manipulated Cuban reality. I am Cristina Escobar. I'll be here again telling you the story behind the news on Thursday. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Cristina. Cristina Escobar here on Radio Havana Cuba. Cristina's heard every Tuesday and Thursday with Cuba Today. And you've tuned to RHC, Radio Havana Cuba. Thanks for joining us on the radio. You may be listening on the international shortwave radio frequencies of RHC, heard around the world in Asia, Africa, Latin America. We're on the FM radio here in Havana at 102.5 FM, and you can pick us up on our internet connection on our website. Just go to www.radiohc.cu. That's the World Wide Web, www.radiohc.cu.
With its blockade policy against Cuba, successive U.S. administrations have sought to suffocate the Cuban economy for purely political reasons.
The U.S. economic blockade against Cuba is an act of aggression aimed at putting maximum pressure on Cuba, trying to strangulate the Cuban economy with the aim of extracting political concessions from our country. In the past year and a half, we can count around 30 new measures taken against Cuba by the U.S. government, most of them deliberately directed to specific areas like trade, technology, the financial sector, the tourism sector, and most recently, the aim to deprive Cuba from the supply of oil, of fuel that our country needs as any other country needs.
Carlos Fernández de Cosío, Director General of the U.S. Desk at Cuba's Ministry for Foreign Affairs.
The last measurement that we did of a year impact of the economic blockade against Cuba is about $4 billion within the year. One can try to estimate the impact for the year performance of the economy of any country, the size of Cuba, if it were to suffer the loss implied by the economic blockade. The added amount impact of the blockade is above $134 billion since 1960. It is a huge impact for the economy of any developing country, and that is the case of Cuba.
End Washington's genocidal blockade of Cuba now.
And that's it. Ain't no more time for today. Spinning the dials and pushing them buttons for our English language broadcasts, it's on the controls, El Maestro Tony Barrios. General production by Roberto Bastidas. Now tomorrow in our programming, we'll bring you another mailbag show. We'll answer your letters and email messages on the radio. We've got cultural stuff too, and much, much more. Right here on the radio. Radio Havana Cuba. Mañana.
I got you.